Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Within Range Coaching Podcast. I'm Ranger, certified holistic success coach, and in this podcast, I'm breaking down the journey that entrepreneurs face as they start their organization, find solutions to the roadblocks in their way, and create an impact that lasts. So if you're an entrepreneur, nonprofit leader, or purpose-driven community member that wants to learn how to grow your impact and develop yourself as the person behind the mission, then this podcast is for you. I know you're just as eager to get started as I am, so let's jump right in. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the Within Range Coaching Podcast. I'm about halfway through my walk across the country. I think I'm about 300 miles or so shy of the actual halfway point, but I'm taking a few days off over in Oklahoma with some family, and I don't know, I feel like I just want to sing the praises of Facebook and social media again because, meeting people randomly has been fantastic. I've met a lot of great people, heard some great stories. Just the people that have connected me with folks for staying for a day or two, have been on the podcast, or, the hosts, the families, the people I come across. But I feel like Facebook and social media have done such a huge part in the connections that I've made. And one of those examples is our guest for today. But again, like I did in Little Rock area, I posted on the Fort Smith, what's happening in Fort Smith Facebook group, kind of just talking about the mission for the walk, who I'm looking to interview, looking for some help here and there. And today's guest, Austin Coates, is one of the people that responded to it. And when I heard about his mission, his organization, and what they do, I knew I had to go and check them out. And I hung out with them for what were we together for, like an hour or two that day?
Yeah, for about 2 hours.
Yeah, about 2 hours or so. Had some news out there, some media, but I knew I wanted to try to get some more long-form content with him to really share the story more than just a 10-minute YouTube video can cover. But anyway, you've already heard his voice a little bit, so allow me to introduce the founder and director of Hope's Bridge, which is a recovery residence in Fort Smith, Arkansas. Austin, how's it going today?
It's going well. Thanks for having me, Ranger. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, of course. I'm excited to chitter chat and hear more about your story and share that with the listeners. So thank you again for all that you do and for dealing with my scheduling conflicts today and getting it all squared away. But yeah, just to start the conversation off, let's go ahead and share a little bit about yourself with the audience and also talk a little bit about what your intention for today's episode is.
So I'm in recovery myself from opiate use disorder, from opiate addiction. It started back in high school. I played football. I had 3 surgeries on my shoulder from football injuries. I got hooked on the pain medication that I was prescribed, and it really just took a horrible down spiral from there for the next, 20 years or so, where I went through a whole lot, and I put my family and people around me through a whole lot, and eventually got sober, wrote a couple books, started this organization, Hope's Bridge, and here I am today talking to you. And I think the main thing that I would like people to take away from today is, number one, that people that are suffering from addiction and substance use disorder, that they can recover and live, an empowering and sober and fulfilling lifestyle.
Wonderful. So, yeah, it sounds like you being in recovery yourself gives you that, that unique perspective or that connection to people that are going through it currently. And you even just through our conversations, which we'll get to in a moment, it's possible, not only theoretically, but you've seen it happen, and you're a shining example of recovery being possible.
It's certainly possible. There was a point where, we've talked about it before, where I was homeless. I was sleeping on a beach in Florida, sleeping behind dumpsters. And here I am today, doing what I'm doing with, like I said, a couple books under my belt that have been published, and just trying to be a living example to people in recovery that literally anything is possible. So,
yeah. And going from homeless under a bridge or wherever you were staying in, you had to save up money to get, I'm going to let you tell your own story, I guess. But I think it's just so interesting that we hear these stories of people after everything has happened, right?
Right.
And after you got out of your bad situation, realized what was going on, kind of that rocky cutscene that I've mentioned a couple times, where you're getting punched in the face, you're having all these bad things happen, you're putting in the work that I guess is needed to get where you want to go. So like what is your rocky cutscene? What did that look like?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think there was a point, I guess there was a point where I went to a treatment center in Colorado. This is my seventh or eighth time in treatment. And I had, it was, I had already been through my entire addiction. And this was on the tail end of when I got sober. And I was sitting at a table filling out the paperwork in Fort Collins, Colorado. It was actually Wellington, a little bit north of Fort Collins. And I was filling out the paperwork to get admitted into this place where I was going to be there for a year. And it asked for a background, name, birthday, your drugs you're using, blah blah. And they got to a question that was kind of it was a defining moment for me, and it was a very simple question that on the surface nobody would think anything about, but for me it was kind of an epiphany and a changing moment in my life. And that question said, "Who is responsible for all of the problems in your life?" And I sat there and it just hit me like a ton of bricks, like this blanket just blew off. And I got this clear vision, that, and it sounds so simplistic and so, almost self-evident that anybody would be able to realize, but it would hit me like I am responsible for my problems. Like, and so it was the first moment where I had been kind of subconsciously waiting around for somebody else to get sober for me, somebody else to go finish college for me, somebody else to get a job for me. And I realized, like, this is my life. I gotta take charge of it. Like, it's me. I gotta do it. And so from that moment forward, like, I took charge, and that's what really changed my life and set off on my journey where I am today.
Yeah, and when you mentioned that to me before, that who's responsible for your problems or your addiction, like what was their intention with having it on there? Is that something that is commonly on questionnaires, or do
Oh,
you think they were
that
trying to kind of cause that gotcha moment, or what?
I think they were. Yeah, I think they were. Because, like I said, I've been to treatment centers all over the country before, and I've never had that question on the intake paperwork before. And knowing the people that were running the place and the type of organization that was, I think they were trying to induce or incite that aha moment in people, or at least get them thinking about it. Because it worked. It worked for me, and I don't know why I never really thought about that before, but I didn't, and that's what kind of led me down the path I'm on today.
Yeah, because like you were saying, it sounds like there's very much that victim mindset of I'm waiting for someone to come and save me. This is somebody else's fault. Like who in your mind, like who was to blame at that time? What did that?
I don't really think there was a particular person. I think, a lot of us, well, I can't speak for anybody else, but in addiction, we get so consumed in the day-to-day lifestyle of trying to find money to get what we need to get to feel better. Because, for opiates anyway, like when you don't have them, you get really sick. Like you get withdrawal, and it's horrible. And you're not going to die from it, but you feel like you're going to die. There are withdrawals from other substances like alcohol and benzodiazepines that you can actually die from the withdrawal. But opiates, you feel like you're going to die and you want to die, but you're not going to. And so, um, it was very much a victim mindset. I don't think that there was any one particular person. It was never in the forefront of my mind that, like, I got to take charge, because I was so consumed with the day-to-day lifestyle that came along with being in active addiction, that I didn't ever think about it.
Yeah, and maybe I just don't know a whole lot about what addiction means and how that kind of happens, because I feel like there is a belief out there that people, are addicted to drugs or alcohol, and it's just, oh, well, this feels good, so I'm just going to do it, right? But it
Sure.
sounds like there's a lot more like a physiological and almost like a fight or flight response that happens. I mean, just describing it as it feels like you're going to die, and you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like it would make
Right.
sense why it would be such a, oh, I need this. It's not just, oh, I really want this really bad. It's
Right.
like what are those like physiological effects
Yeah.
that can happen to
Yeah.
folks?
So there's there's a couple different aspects to what you're just describing. So, for instance, like alcoholics, there's been studies and it's proven science that that alcoholics process alcohol differently in their brains and in their body than people who are not alcoholics, right? And so we talk about in recovery, there's a spiritual malady that we suffer from in our active addiction, a malady, something that's missing in our spiritual life that allows us to continue down that path and not change our course. There's a physical allergy to it, so that means that when I put something in my body, there's a physical reaction in my body that doesn't happen to normal people, right? So we talked a little bit before. There's a couple different ways that somebody could find themselves in active addiction. One being they could be predisposed to it in a familiar manner, so it could be passed down hereditarily. They could be predisposed to addiction, to where they're more likely to engage in that kind of behavior if they consume it at some point in their life. Another way is that they are prescribed into addiction, where their doctor, prescribes them pain medication like me for long enough. They take it and become physically dependent on it through their body. And then the third way is they could actively use their way into it, which they're not necessarily prescribed something, but they consume something long enough that they become physically dependent on it. And so for me, it was a mixture between the last two. I was prescribed into it. And then when the prescriptions ran out, I continued to use my way into it, and eventually started using the needle, and I just took a downward spiral. So.
Gotcha. So it's the predisposed, prescribed into it, and what was that last one more time?
You could be you could use your way into it. So if you take a substance long enough that has addictive properties, you're eventually going to be dependent on. Your body will change, and you'll be physically dependent on that chemical if you use it for a long enough period of time.
Gotcha. Okay. So it's definitely not just it feels good, so I'm going to keep doing it. There's legitimate physical changes that happen in the body that cause you to be dependent.
Right. Yeah, that's true. But it is a case of, like, for me, like, whenever I got prescribed pain medication, I liked the way it made me feel. And so that's why I continue to do it.
Gotcha.
So, but I was also being prescribed the medication. And so that's why I say it was a mixture between the two. But so, yeah, it could definitely be the fact that I just like the way it makes me feel. And there's kind of a stigma attached to addiction and addicts and alcoholics, and that they grew up in a horrible life, horrible family, or whatever. But that's not the case. I grew up in a great family, a great home. My family took care of me. I couldn't ask for better parents. I never really wanted for anything. We weren't just rich by any means, but I had anything I ever needed, and so I had a great family. So there's nothing I was really trying to run away from when I started mine. I was prescribed this medication that I liked the way it made me feel, and it took off.
Gotcha. Okay, so there's many different factors. It sounds like it's going to be very different for everybody.
Sure.
Based off of family, life, the people that you're exposed to. In your case, it was a football injury, which is people you play sports to be healthy and do all the build team and community, and it kind of went south almost for you.
Yeah, it did. I had three injuries. So I had one each year of my high school football career. So at the end of the season of each of those years, I had an operation. And so that's really what led me down my path, was those operations and being prescribed medication, and then dealing with the pain in between during seasons and stuff like that.
Gotcha. Okay. So the surgeries happen. You become addicted to the opioids. Like, can we go a little bit more detail on what happened with you after that, or what the situation you were in?
Yeah, so I went to college at the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville, and that's the first time. It was would have been my sophomore year in college. So I used pain medication. I was just taking the pills up until this point, pretty much every day. I didn't really know that I was addicted. There was a point where I was driving from Northwest Arkansas, from Fayetteville back down here to Fort Smith one night, middle of December. It's about an hour drive on the interstate, directly south from Fayetteville to Fort Smith. And I was coming back. I don't know what I was coming back from. And there was a time where it was freezing outside. I mean, it had to be close to zero, middle of the winter. and I was just dripping in sweat, and just so hot. And I rolled all the windows down in my truck, driving down the interstate, freezing cold, and I was still hot, just dripping in sweat with all the windows down. And I remember thinking like, this is not okay. Like something is radically wrong with me, And I had no idea that I was in active addiction and that this was part of withdrawal, So I didn't even know. And so fast forward a little ways, about a year after that, I was introduced to the needle, and I started using OxyContin intravenously, and that's really where it took off for me. I stayed up in college for the next couple of years, slowly drifting out of classes and grades falling, and I ended up leaving college with one semester left to finish. And so I was one semester shy, and I ended up leaving just because I was in too bad shape. And I came back home. I couldn't pay my rent, couldn't do anything, got kicked out of school because I wasn't going to class. And so came back home, and it just continued. I had several different stints in rehab. There's a moment the first time where, I went to my family and I said, hey, I've got something going on. I've got a problem and I got to fix it. I need some help. And so, my family was real new to this, as was I, and we didn't really know what to do or where to go. And so they just found the most expensive, best, fanciest place in America that they could find for me to go to treatment. It happened to be in Southern Florida. And we kind of had this idea that I was going to go down there and stay for a month and come back cured. We're going to go back to life as we know it. And we both kind of felt that way just because we had no idea what this was about. And so I went down there and stayed at this beautiful resort looking thing and went to treatment and came back home, and life did not go back to the way it should be. I was not fixed, and I realized that this was something deeper than that, and so I continued to use, and about a year later I went back down for another stint in a different treatment center, but back down in the same area in Florida. And this time the goal was for me to finish treatment, stay down there for a year and work and just kind of start a new life, And I ended up relapsing right when I got out of treatment and started getting kicked out of halfway houses, bouncing around from halfway house to halfway house. And I eventually ran them all out, and didn't have anywhere to go. And so I found myself homeless for the first time in Southern Florida, and didn't know what to do, didn't know where to go. And so my best idea of the safest thing I could think of was the first night that I was homeless. I waited until the police station was just about to close at 5 o'clock, and I snuck in the front lobby there, and snuck into the bathroom in the lobby of the police station, the Delray Beach Police Department, and I slept in that bathroom all night long. And it was freezing. I remember all night long reaching up and hitting the big silver button on the hand dryer by the sink, and letting it blow down on me all night long because it was so cold in there. And then, like I said, a couple of nights I slept on the beach, which was not fun. It sounds like it's fun, but the sand gnats are absolutely relentless overnight. And I slept behind a dumpster at the library one night, and I remember getting shooed off like a dog from the library the next morning about 7 a.m. And I remember that was one of those moments where I was like, how did I get to this point in my life? You know what I mean? When she was shooing me off, but I knew exactly how I got there. And so it was kind of a weird moment for me, and I didn't feel good. And so there's things like that. I spent a month in Africa, trying to do some mission work and go on safari to get away from here. And that was an experience in itself. I was actually the plane ride out there. I used up until the moment that I left. And so I spent 16 hours of the flight in the bathroom, just throwing up, shaking uncontrollably and withdrawal. It was awful. And then I got out there, and like I said, it was a very cool experience. But again, that was not enough to change me, change my addiction. I continued down that path, and there was a lot more to play out ahead of that.
Yeah. So it sounds like a lot of it was trying to get yourself out of different physical locations, but moving down to South Florida, going back home, going back to a different treatment center. I mean, just going across the world to a whole other continent.
Right.
I have a question. So in regards to that first stint in rehab, it sounded like you and your parents were both under the impression that, oh, we'll just go for a month, you'll be fine. Almost like it's treating like the common cold, right? Like, oh, if you just do this, like
Right.
this will be fine. Like, where did
Yeah.
that I guess that what's the word? That expectation or that belief of how long it would take, like where did that come from for you guys?
Well, we didn't have any idea. Like, no, we never dealt with it before. I guess
Yeah.
it was kind of like we had an idea that like that it wasn't necessarily the time spent. I think it was just like going the act of going to rehab, right? Going to treatment. So we just kind of, I guess we just kind of just felt like maybe just going to treatment, like this is what we need to fix. Like it would be just like the medicine to the common cold or whatever. Like this is what people do to get better from addiction, and then it's fixed. We didn't really know any better because it was our first experience with him.
Yeah. And what do you think was missing from that experience that because I mean it sounds like it sounds like we're getting closer to the questionnaire part of the story, but what how did a month in rehab not shift that mindset for you, but a question on another intake form did?
Sure. I don't think so. To answer your question, I don't think it was actually I think that specific question is kind of what sparked it on that intake form, but I don't think that that is the question itself is what changed it. I think it was I wasn't ready, right? So that very first time I went, I knew in the back of my mind that I really wanted to continue to use. And so we don't change until we want to change. But there's also a juxtaposition aspect of that I remember many times I prayed for like I would say like please God help me to want to change, right? I knew I needed to, but I didn't want to, and so I would that the time wasn't right for me to get sober because I wasn't ready. I hadn't gone through enough and suffered enough consequences at that point to really warrant a change in my life. I really hadn't gone through anything horrible yet, and so fast forward through all the years where I found myself in Colorado, and there had been a lot that had happened, and I had gotten a lot more mature, and I finally had got to a point to where I was like, man, I got to do something. This is enough. This is enough. And I had seen my friends that I graduated with all having great careers now. They got families, and here I am, with nothing. And I felt shameful. I felt embarrassed. I felt like less than. And so not to mention all the hurt that I put my family and myself through and all the money that we wasted on stuff. And so that first time in treatment, I wasn't ready. You got to be ready to change before you can change. And I wasn't ready at that point.
Okay, so it sounds like it's a lot more of that again, that internal desire rather than just.
Yeah,
It sounds like you're just going through the motions, like kind of
definitely.
expecting someone else to, or something, someone, an external factor to make you change rather than that internal, I want to make a difference. I want to change. I want something different.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And you speak of like changing environments, and so that's a very common misconception in recovery regarding people that are trying to get sober that don't really know much about it, like I did not. So we've got a saying of wherever you go, there you are. Right. So the problem is me. It's not my environment. It's not this particular rehab. It's not this particular environment. The problem is me. So I could go across the world to Africa like I did, and I'm still, there I am, right? Because I am the problem. The problem exists in my brain and in the spiritual malady that I'd spoken of. And so until those things are fixed, I'm not gonna get sober. I'm not gonna change my life. And so it didn't matter where I went. It was not a change of environment that I needed, although it can help to kind of propel you down the correct path, getting away from certain people and stuff like that and triggers. But ultimately the work has got to come from within to change.
Gotcha. Okay, so it sounds like there is an aspect of getting away from certain people, pulling yourself out of situations, maybe kind of putting some distance, but I'm just making up numbers. So that's like 5-10% of the game. That 90, 95, 99% of it is that desire and want to change yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So what started kicking off that internal desire for you? It sounds like I don't know, being the police department and the library, like that kind of started it, or was there something else?
No, I think that was real early on in my addiction. It was much later than that. I think like I said, I just gotten older, and I had enough. I got to I don't believe that for me, I didn't really have a rock bottom. I mean, my rock bottom is going to be dead, right? I went as low as I could, and I could go lower, but I just fortunately, I got to a point where, there's a big spiritual aspect to my recovery. And I got to a point to where I genuinely, I wanted to change. Like I said earlier, you have to want to change. And so I got to a point where I just said, like, God help me. I can't do this. You know what I mean? And so I tried everything in my power before that to get sober on my own with everything inside of my body, with my brain, with reading. I tried everything I could inside of me to get sober, and I was not successful at it one time. So therefore, that told me that something outside of my body had to help me. And it can't be something that is equal than me. It can't be another person in a place. It's got to be something greater than me, because if something equal that to me, like another person could do it, then I could get myself sober, right? So therefore, I knew that it had to be something greater than me to help me get sober. And so that's where the spiritual aspect came into play. And that's been a major part of my recovery ever since. And it was a major part of my life growing up, the way I was raised, but I looked at it a completely different way when I got sober.
Gotcha. Because earlier we were talking about more like that external validation or external pressures, but it's like those the people, expecting someone else to get me sober, right? Like we mentioned that earlier. It's not necessarily that is what you're talking about. It sounds like that spiritual aspect. I'm assuming, God, the universe, whatever you want to call it, like
Right.
that is like what about that was so impactful for you, I guess.
I think it was, so the place that I went to in Colorado, right? It was this big ranch, and the plan was for me to stay there years, like working ranch. There was like 90 other guys there, and it was a faith-based organization, right? And so I let me back up a little bit. I grew up raised in, a religious home where we went to church pretty regularly. It wasn't, anything over the top. I mean, it was just a typical religious home, I guess, if you could say that there is one. But we would go to church, and we believe, I grew up a believer, and my parents are believers, and we believe in God and Jesus. And so, but when I got to this place in Colorado, I didn't, I would attend these Bible studies and stuff like that, and I didn't get much out of them, right? I mean, I believe in what they're teaching, but it wasn't really affecting me. It wasn't really helping me. While I find the Bible, I believe the Bible, and I believe that it's truth, and I find that it's interesting, and I do enjoy reading it and trying to practice it. But there was something about, in the mornings, like for instance, in the mornings, I had to wake up and I had to walk about a quarter mile from where I was sleeping to the cafeteria. And it was always right before dawn when the sun was coming up. And for some reason, I don't know what it is, but in Colorado, the sunrises and the sunsets are just absolutely beautiful. And I've never been anywhere else in the country where they look like this, just the shades of orange and yellow. And it's just absolutely gorgeous. And so when I would walk in the mornings from where I was sleeping to the cafeteria, I would look at these sunsets, and I would just begin to experience a feeling of fullness and content, and I would just be overcome with it, some sort of spiritual feeling of a void that was not there before, right? And so those mornings became the time that I would do like pray and talk to God, and I would feel God. And so there was a time where I made a comment to somebody that ran the place that I get more out of those walks in the morning than I do with the Bible studies. Well, obviously they didn't like that. They ended up kicking me out. And so, which is fine. And so that's where I found myself 800 miles away from home and homeless again. And I realized I found myself in a homeless shelter. And so I came to a point where I had a decision that I had to make, right? So I could do what I've always done. I could go out and find what I want and use and continue down that path, or I could go the other direction and I could make a choice to stay sober. And so that's what I did. And I stayed at that homeless shelter. I got a job making pizzas, and then I got a little bit better job in construction. And I stayed at that shelter, for several months, and saved up money, and I bought a truck and I drove back home, and I stayed sober. And so, and that was that was when I got back home was when I wrote my first book about my addiction and my recovery. Spoons for Starting Coffee. Both of my books are available on Amazon. But so I wrote that book and I stayed sober for almost 5 years. And I ended up relapsing after having this book out about my addiction, have it published. I was the face of recovery. And then, here I am. I had relapsed it was real humbling and real embarrassing. And, there's a major humility aspect to it. And I used for about a year and a half. And then I eventually got sober again. And I've been sober now for 8 years. So that's where I'm at now.
And I want to acknowledge you for that in terms of just being honest about it, right? Because I feel like it could have been something that you would hide or, again, be shameful of or embarrassed. But it sounds like that's just part of the story.
Yeah. No, it is. And that's, it's important for me to talk about my relapse with people, especially after being the face of a recovery like I was, because relapse does not have to be a part of recovery, right? And that's not necessary. It doesn't have to happen, but relapse is a part of recovery for me and many, many people that I know. So it's very common. And, a lot of people have this misconception that you lose everything when you relapse and you got to start all over. And while you do in regards to how long you've been sober, you don't lose everything you learned throughout your sobriety in that time. You still know all that stuff. And so you're not starting over, and so there's obviously something missing in your recovery, which caused you to relapse, right? And so it's a learning opportunity to be able to identify that and prevent it from happening again.
Right. And I mean, just kind of taking that and putting it out and like expanding it out, like that's true for whether you're an entrepreneur, a leader, a parent. Like you can go from, in this case, addiction, sobriety, relapse, sobriety, or failure, success, however you want to, attribute it to your story. But again, like you don't lose those lessons that you've learned. And I think that, again, what you're saying is it takes a lot of humility to kind of step back and say, okay, something worked here, but something really did not work either. What's that thing that didn't work? How can we get rid of that? Or how can we expand on these things that did work?
Right.
So with that being said, like what is it that wasn't working, or what did you have to change to maintain your sobrieties this long?
Yeah. So I think in regards to my relapse the first time, there was somebody very close to me that was introduced to my life that was using at the time, and I didn't know that they were, and it came out that they were, and I continued to tell them, that I couldn't be around them, that they continued to use because I'm in recovery. It's dangerous for me, and they continued to, say that I would quit. I promise I'll quit, and it didn't happen. And it just time and time again. And there was a point where I finally just said, you know what? Okay, let's do it together, and that's how it happened. And so I think the complacency played a major part in that. I wasn't really doing the daily stuff that I know to do to stay strong. And, in hindsight, I should have not allowed myself to be around that stuff to begin with. So I think that's where initially I went wrong. But I think I just become complacent. I was 5 years into this thing, and I was like, I got this, I'm good, but I was not good.
Yeah, it's just kind of what you're saying there. It's like how people kind of get relaxed on safety regulations or rules. Oh, I'm around it every day. Oh, I don't need to put the PPE on. I don't need to do that anymore. It's like, no, exactly. It's you got to practice the small stuff, because that's what's going to come and bite you eventually.
It is. Yeah, it is. Yeah. And so, it was that. And so I remember I ended up getting arrested after I'd relapsed, and I getting arrested again for something. And that was July the 3rd, 2016. Right. So I've been sober since that day. And so I remember getting put in the back of the police car that day, and the police officer, they were waiting for me outside of my house that morning for something, and they put me in the car. And so they put me in the back of the seat, and the officer hadn't got back in the car yet. So I was the only one in there. So they put me in there, and I remember sitting in the back seat of that car with my hands cupped behind my back. And I said out loud to myself, thank you, God. Like I was so relieved that it was over, right? Because I knew that if I could just get out of my situation and get on a path of where I can have a little bit of time under my belt without using, that I could remain sober, right? And I just couldn't get myself out of that. I was so um I was so deep back into it. I couldn't do it myself. And so that was, God doing for me what I couldn't do for myself. And I was just so grateful that it had come to an end. And it sounds crazy to happy and grateful that you got arrested, but to me, that was a life changing moment. Like I was so happy to be finally free of what I had been in, for the past year and a half.
That's so interesting. Just because you'd be, I don't know, locked up for however long, or you wouldn't even have the opportunity to have access to anything. It was almost like a forced, like reset or a forced quit. Yeah.
Yeah, I was in jail at that time for about a month, and then I went from there to another treatment center for 3 months. So, but yeah, that month, it was a forced, and you can get drugs in jail. Don't get me wrong, it's no surprise you can get drugs in jail, but it was much easier for me to stay sober in jail than it was outside, because I was able to keep myself in there, and I just saw it as an opportunity to stop. It was kind of a forced reset, like you said. And then that was kind of a springboard to go into another treatment center, like I did for another 3 months after that. And so when I was back out into the real world in society at that point, I had 4 months of sobriety under my belt. And I knew that if I could just get a little bit of time under myself again, that I could do it, because I'd done it before. And so now, since then, it's been 8 years and here I am, and I'm so grateful that I'm still able to say that I've not used drugs or alcohol since that day.
That's amazing. Hey guys, Ranger of Recordings Past jumping in real quick to talk to all of you coffee and tea lovers. Are you ready to brew up something amazing? If so, I've got just the thing for you. Cold-Blooded Caffeine Company. This isn't just any coffee, it's your ticket to a great boost of energy that helps save the rainforest. Trey and McKendrick, the founders, were able to find the perfect intersection between wildlife conservation and high-quality coffee. With each sip, you're supporting wildlife conservation efforts in coffee-producing countries, since 5% of every bag sold goes directly to protecting our planet's precious ecosystems. I've been hooked for a couple years now, ever since I picked up my first few bags at the Sacramento Reptile Show, which is exactly why when I had the opportunity to partner with them for my walk across the country, I jumped at it. My personal favorite has been the U.S. Ark Bourbon Barrel Aged Blend, followed closely by their classic Rainforest Blend. They also have multiple flavors of tea, so there's something for everyone. So drink up, make a difference, and savor every moment. Go ahead and check the link in the show notes for the referral link for some coffee, and don't forget to use the code RANGER at checkout to get 10% off. Cold-Blooded Caffeine Company, coffee with a cause. Hit the link in the show notes and grab some purpose-driven coffee today. I guess to kind of like transition to the now, it sounds like you've taken all of those lessons, the 5 years, the whole thing, right? Because how long roughly did this whole, from high school when it started to now, what is that, like 15, 20?
So it would have been, I guess, I graduated in '03. I started using my first year, and what really, it was really the year before high school, but say 2000. So yeah, so it's been 25 years, but I used for, a good 15 plus years, I guess, is what it would be. And so it's been quite some time.
Yeah. And it sounds so weird to say this about a situation like this, but it sounds like with that experience, with what you've gone through, what you've learned about yourself, what you've seen work for others, now you've been able to kind of take all of that and transition it into Hope's Bridge to help other people through their recovery process, through their addiction. Yeah. Like how did Hope's Bridge come to be, and like what are you guys doing now?
Yeah. So like I said, after I wrote my first book, I started getting messages from people all over the world, that would say stuff like, hey, thank you, you saved my life, or thank you, you helped me understand my son better or my mom better, or, you helped my family out through your story. And so it was those messages that made me feel so good. And so I knew at that point that that was my purpose, right? And so there's Sigmund Freud has this concept, this idea that we live two halves of lives, right? Or that we have the potential to live two halves of lives. And so we live the first half of our life trying to figure out what purpose we're supposed to serve on this planet, right? And then there's a transition period before we enter our second half of our life. And so the second half of our life is you end up living out that purpose, right? And so this little transition period between there where you're figuring out what exactly you're supposed to do. Sometimes it's not comfortable. Sometimes it's really uncomfortable. It could be very volatile time, which was mine, during that volatile time. And then you get this opportunity to live out the purpose of your life. And so some people aren't fortunate enough to be able to do that. Some people live their entire life in the first half. They don't ever get to figure out what they're supposed to be doing. They just kind of live this humdrum life and go through, the routine. But I figured out in writing my book that my purpose was helping people, right? And through my story and through what I've been through. And so that's what led me down the path of working in this field. I worked at a couple of different treatment centers prior to opening Hope's Bridge, and then a very, very dear friend of mine, Hope Wright, died of an overdose from fentanyl. And so it was immediately following that, about a year after that, I founded Hope's Bridge Inc. in honor of her name. And I wrote a grant to the Arkansas Opioid Recovery Partnership, which is an agency that received opioid settlement money from the opioid epidemic. So you look back, and the opioid epidemic really started with Purdue Pharma and the Sackler family, where they invented OxyContin back in I think it was around the early 90s. And so they marketed this drug as this amazing, incredible drug that was non-addictive, that could cure pain. And they told everybody that it was non-addictive. And so obviously it was very addictive. And that's really what started me on my addiction, was that particular medication. And so fast forward to recent times, the federal government ended up suing them for falsely stating that it was non-addictive. And they got ordered to pay billions and billions of dollars, along with a couple other drug manufacturers that were making similar drugs. And the federal government got all this money and then dispersed it to the states, and each state got the amount that was equivalent to how much they had been affected by the opioid epidemic. And how they figured that up, I'm real sure. But so Arkansas got a big pot of money from the settlement, and they are now able to give that out through grants to state agencies and nonprofits who are using these funds, these settlement funds, to help abate the opioid epidemic. And so I had founded Hope's Bridge, and I wrote a grant to the Arkansas Opioid Recovery Partnership, and they graciously granted me a grant for $319,000 to buy my first house here under Hope's Bridge and remodel it and furnish it. And we founded the organization January 2023. We were granted the funds. I believe it was in May. And then we closed on the house shortly after that. It's been a couple months. It was March, I believe, is when we received it. It's been a couple months remodeling. We opened the first house in August 1st of last year, and we filled it up within the first month. The need for this is just so great. And so now we're able to provide this house, and so what we try to do is, our mission is to empower and support individuals recovering from substance use disorder in their journey towards a sober and fulfilling lifestyle, and help them in their integration into society through different comprehensive and individualized recovery resident services and peer mentoring and job readiness training. So we offer quite a lot, as opposed to just giving them a place to stay. They have to participate in our program and stay sober, get a job, and participate in their own recovery. So they got to go to meetings. And so, we're able to provide this safe place for them, but they also have to do the work to be able to stay there, and so that's where we're at now. We're looking to expand and open a couple more houses, another men's house and a couple women's houses. We want to get one open that is for women and children, so mothers that have children, because we have identified a great need for that in our community. And so our goal for this year is to get those other houses open, and provide services to a broader range and demographic of people in the community, and then kind of go from there and see where we want to go.
Gotcha. Yeah. So really just taking so many different parts of your life and putting it into what Hopes Bridge is. And it sounds like there's resources and everything out there for people that want to do things like this. Like, how did you figure that out? I mean, did you just Google it or what?
Are you talking about like the grants and stuff?
Like the grants, yeah, because it's just
Yeah,
interesting that there is so much money out there. Because I've heard that from other people too, that
yeah,
for specific use cases, there's a lot of government funding. So I'm just like,
there
how
is.
did you find out about that?
Yeah, so that particular one, a very good friend of mine, Casey Wilson, who has been involved in the organization quite a bit. And he's the one that told me about that specific grant. And he was with a different organization at the time who was able to access some funds through it. And he called me and he said, "Look, Austin," because we talked for a long time, for years. We were childhood friends, grew up together, and kind of went down a similar path. And we got sober, and we were both working in the field. And we'd always wanted to open an organization like this. And he called me up and he said, "Look, this is real. Like, they're actually able to provide these funds. You need to do this." And so that's where I heard about that first one. But over the course of having this organization open and working with different people and organizations across the state and state entities, I have found that there's a lot of grants and funds to be able to get access through the government and through different other nonprofit agencies. If you know where to look, and if you are an organization that is eligible, obviously, there's a lot of assistance and funds that you can access. Absolutely.
Gotcha. And I guess in terms of the because you've been what, basically less than a year, right around a year, you guys have been open and operating.
Operating, yeah, right under a year. Yeah.
Right under a year, because yeah, we're recording this May 2024, and you said you opened right around this time in
Yeah.
2023.
Well, August 1st is
August
when
1st. There we
we
go.
had our residents move in. Yeah, we closed on the house around this time.
Wow. Okay. So yeah, just a few months off. And I know that when I was there, you said that there was only 10, or there you have 12 beds in the house, 10 are open right now. Like, how many people have gone through the house through recovery already?
So we actually do have 10 people in the house, but the other two are committed to a couple of people that are coming out of treatment. We do have a wait list of people that are wanting to get in. So, I mean, the need is just endless. I've got a very long wait list. And so when a couple beds come open, I'll call the next person that has been on the list. And the two people that are coming in happen to be in treatment right now. And so we've reserved those beds for them. But yeah, so there's how many people have come through. I could look at our like our annual report and tell you, but I mean the bed it stays full. It stays completely full. Fortunately, we have had really good success as far as the people that come in. There hadn't been a great amount of turnover, right? So that tells us that we're doing something right, that people are enjoying what we're providing, and that what we're providing is helping them in their own recovery, and they're able to stay there and stay sober. Because if they leave, it's either because they have returned to using, or some other external factor that's not related to what we're doing. And so it continuously stays full. And I think we've had a little bit of turnover. It's hard to say. Like I said, I could go back and give you some specific numbers, but we've been very. It's been everybody that has come through have been very receptive to what we're doing. They really enjoy what we're doing, and there's nobody around here that is providing these services in our area. There's nobody, and so the need is just so great, and we're trying to fill a gap that's been here for years and years.
Yeah, and I think I realized the way that I asked that question and what I was defining success for Hope's Bridge as: they come in, they get clean, they leave, right?
Sure.
That's what I
Yeah,
would like.
yeah,
It's not like churning people out, like getting them through the process as fast as possible. And I guess that's not necessarily the goal, right? So
right.
can you describe what does success look like for you with the gentlemen that come into the house?
Sure. No, I mean, it is exactly what you said. I think what I would love to see is everybody that comes through the doors of Hope's Bridge, that they would stay there for, 6, 8 months, a year and a half, whatever it takes them, but that everybody that comes through the doors would eventually walk about out the doors in a situation where they are ready to move back into society, get their own place. They have a job, they have income, they're stable, and they move on. That would be ideal for, in my eyes, that would be a success as far as everybody that comes through the doors. Um, some people, that's not really in the cards for them. Some people, they prefer and they thrive in a community setting like we have set up at Hope's Bridge, and that's what they need. And so that's why I don't put a time cap on how long people can stay at the house. I tell them that they can stay there as long as they want. They can stay there forever if they wanted it, because for some people, that's what they need. And so I'm not going to cut off access to something that's helping improve their lives and helping them stay sober. So, but for the most part, they do move on. They do get stable and move on and go out and get another place, and they're able to stay sober with the foundation that they built at Hope's Bridge.
Yeah. And what is it that, so it sounds like they come for the treatment or the come for the help, and they kind of stay for that community that you've built there. Because I mean, even
Right.
just the gentleman that I met a little bit when I was touring with you, I mean, they were very welcoming. They were very cool. Like it sounds like, and I went back to the video that I made about it, and I mentioned how clean and homey it felt like three or four
Yeah.
times. And I don't know what I was expecting going to like an addiction treatment house center, whatever, but it wasn't that. I
Yeah.
suppose because I brought it
Yeah.
up like 4 or 5 times, and again right
Right.
now. So
Yeah.
it sounds like it's really cultivating that family, that relationship, that accountability within the space.
Right. Yeah, no. So, a couple different aspects to what you're talking about. So, number one, the accountability, the community. Yeah, I mean, look at for instance the 12 steps, right? So that's the 12-step program is founded on the idea that somebody who has been through what you have been through is able to walk you through it and get out through the other side, right? And so there's such value in a community setting or somebody who you can relate to. I spoke about it when we sat down at the table the other day, I think, about how back, it was like after the Vietnam War, World War II, where they did a study that when these soldiers return back from war, they go and they're ordered to go see this psychologist, psychiatrist, and to talk through their PTSD and some of the things that they endured while in battle and in combat and in war, the things that they saw. And so they found out through this study that the soldiers would actually benefit greater and they got more out of their time spent in the waiting room talking amongst the other soldiers that have been through what they've been through, more so than they got out of speaking with the doctor, right? And so that there's value in a shared a commonality that you can identify with between your brothers, your sisters, in a family, right? And so the community setting plays a major part in what we're doing. The guys have all been that they all have different stories, but it's the same story, overall. And so they can identify and help each other through a lot of the things that they're struggling with and bounce things off of each other. And so that's one aspect of it. The other aspect is, as far as the physical structure in the house, I wanted to build a space that these guys could be proud of. I wanted to build a space that I would live in myself. I didn't want it to be some sort of rundown house that, is a kind of the typical idea, I guess, like you had mentioned when you think of different recovery homes, or if there's a preconceived notion of them. But I wanted to create a space that these guys will be proud of to call home. And I tell them when their first day that they get there, this is your home. This is your house. It's not mine. This is your house. And so I wanted to create a very nice and clean and environment that they, might not have the opportunity otherwise to live in, that they can be proud of, to come home from work every day and look forward to coming home to. Because if you feel good about where you're living, it helps you feel good in general, and it helps in your recovery.
Gotcha. So you're really playing into that factor of that community, building trust, having that shared experience, and it sounds like that's been pretty successful with you guys.
No, it has. They have
Yeah.
just They love it there. They really do. And they love what we're doing. They love the program that we have in place and the house overall. And that's really what continues to drive me is to see these guys happy and succeed in recovery and, soon to be women, hopefully pretty soon. That's what continues to drive me and helps reinforce the idea that to me that what I'm doing is right, and I'm doing the right thing. And I know there's certainly things that I can improve on and things that I can do different. But overall, I think we're headed in a pretty good direction as far as where we're going with the organization.
That's amazing. Yeah, well, I know you mentioned, I think you said for the second men's home, the women's home, and the women's and children's home, that's
Yeah.
the goal is by the end of 2024 or 2025.
The goal is by the end of 2024. I don't know. We'll see if that's going to happen. That's the goal right now. And I think by the end of 2024, we will be at least halfway through that goal, if not fully through that goal.
That's amazing. Yeah, and I guess to just kind of like wrap up, is there anything that you would want to say to someone that is either in your position, going through recovery, finishing up recovery, and kind of looking for that next step? Like you said, you were like, my purpose is to help people. What would you say to someone that's at that, from that first life to that second half in that
Yeah.
transitional space?
Yeah, I think we talked about it the other day, and I think it's to be able to walk blindly with in faith, and we what I said before, it's okay to reach for something that you don't yet comprehend. It's okay to reach for a goal or to go after a goal, not knowing exactly the path to get there, but you know where you want, right? You know where you want to be, you know where you want to go. So it's okay to not understand how you're going to get there or how it's even possible, right? But just go, just like you're doing on your walk. Just take that first step. You didn't know what was going to happen to you along the way. You didn't know exactly how you were going to make it, but you just started, and it's the same thing. Just take that first step. When I started off on this, man, I had no idea what I was doing, and I told people that I was like, "Look, I have no idea what I'm doing with this. No clue. I've got faith that it's going to work out. So I'm going to do the next right thing." And so I think, to answer your question, just take that step, take that first step, just walk out, and all you have to do is do the next right thing, have good intentions, and it'll work out. And when I say it'll work out, it may not be the way you want, but I promise you that if you're honest and you do the next right thing, it's going to work out the way it's supposed to.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I love that. I think that's a beautiful way to kind of end it off, honestly.
Yeah,
But yeah, man, no, if people, because you said you wrote two books, there was
yeah,
Spoons Are for Stirring Coffee, and there's a second
yeah,
one. I'm not sure if you mentioned
yeah.
that, the
Yeah,
name
the
of it.
second one is called Getting Over Jordan. I had the opportunity to, I've got a very dear friend of mine who's a retired physician, and he's got an incredible, incredible story. I had the opportunity to tell that for him, and the way that we had met was pretty, I don't know, I guess it was a pretty poetic way that we met and things that have transpired since then. But I was able to tell his story of some time that he spent running an emergency room, and there was a little girl named Jordan that died in his emergency room under his watch, and it changed the course of his life and eventually changed his beliefs and the way that he really walked his life. And so I had the opportunity to tell his story, and it's called Getting Over Jordan, and both of them are available on Amazon, and you can just Google Austin Coates or look them up on Amazon. They'll be there.
Oh, you don't have to Google Austin Coates. It's all going to be in the show notes.
There you go. Perfect. Yeah,
I'll
there
go
you
ahead and
go.
link both those books in the show notes, Getting Over Jordan and Spoons Are for Stirring Coffee, and as well as all the social media. But where can people find you if they want to just listen to this and Google things? Where would they find Hope's Bridge and everything on socials?
Yeah, so you can find it at hopesbridge.org, our website. We've got a media page with I'll have this on there and all the other news clippings, and you can read about our organization there. There's contact information. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, Austin Coates, Austin Lee Coates. And then Hopes Bridge has a page on Facebook. Also, Hopes Bridge of Fort Smith is on the name on Facebook. And you can reach out to in those ways, or me directly through email, austin@hopesbridge.org. So any of those ways.
Perfect, Austin. All right, I'll go ahead and link all that in the show notes, the books, the Facebook, the social media, the email. If anybody wants to follow along on Austin and Hope's Bridge's journey as they expand and help more people and just really be a shining light for treatment through addiction or treatment through addiction and helping folks get to the other side of that and really just, I don't know, create the life they know they need to live. So Austin, thank you so much for all the work that you're doing, for spending some time with us. I appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys do, and I don't know, opening up house after house after house and getting folks in, because it sounds like it's definitely something that's needed, especially in the Fort Smith area, and I'm sure all over the place. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I appreciate the opportunity to come on here and speak with you. I admire what you're doing, Ranger, and your walk. And that takes quite a bit of fortitude and ambition and discipline and strength. And so I commend you on what you're doing as well. And I'm trying to spread your message and what you're doing throughout my means of communication and media also.
Awesome. I appreciate it, sir. All right, man. Well, I'll talk to you later. Maybe we'll do a re-up here in another year or two and see where you guys are at. But until then, I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you guys once again for joining us on today's episode. I think that my biggest takeaway from our conversation with Austin today is how our stories and the trials, the tribulations, and really the pain we go through in our lives can really be used as a sounding board, like a jumping off point to help and serve others. I hope that everybody can take a moment to see where your story has led you and where you can lead others to the other side of any issues, trials, and tribulations that they're going through in their life. Once again, I'm going to be sharing all of Austin's information in the show notes, including information about Hope's Bridge, and ways that you could donate to help their cause, that you can support them on social media. Really, I do think that this is a great cause and something that really should be replicated in, I'd say, just the big cities, but pretty much any area where there's people. I'm sure that this service could be used. So I hope that you take away some key points from today's discussion. Remember, once again, to check out our sponsor, Cold Blooded Caffeine Company, in the description as well. They're a great source of all of your caffeine needs. So if you want to support the podcast and stories from people that are making a difference in other people's lives through the experiences in theirs, please check them out. Even just a follow, like, and review on social media for them would go a long way. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please remember to give us a like, a review, and take a moment to share the episode. Guys, the best way for us to get the word out about how important it is to support and help one another and serve humanity would be to share episodes like this. My intention with every episode is to inspire, to elevate, and really just help people learn that they can make a difference regardless of how small, regardless of where it is. I think today's episode would be a great way to share that message. So share us on social media, tag us. Every time you tag me, I'm going to reshare it. So share the podcast. And with all that being said, thank you guys once again. I'll see you next week. Remember to have fun, stay safe, and be yourself. Thanks.